Hello, everyone. This is Steve Marinucci, Beatles Examiner on Examiner.com, welcoming you to another Things We Said Today, our weekly uninhibited roundtable discussion of the Beatles, past, present, and we hope to come. Let me first introduce my four fearless co-hosts. Out in the Pennsylvania area, we have the executive editor of Beatle Fan Magazine, Mr. Al Sussman. Good evening, Al.
Hey, Steve. Hello there, everybody.
And halfway up the New England coast, we have the host of the Beatles show, Every Little Thing, Mr. Ken Michaels. Hello, Ken.
Hi, Steve. Hi, everybody.
And up in Maine, even though he doesn't want to admit it, he's in Red Sox country, our musicologist and Beatle author, Mr. Allan Kozin. Hello, Allan.
Hey, Steve. Hello, everyone. Go Yankees.
I can't. I'm sorry. I can't resist doing that stuff, especially as a Red Sox fan. Although the Red Sox started out really badly, so you should be happy there.
Right.
So,
well, I think the Yankees may be doing even worse, but
yeah, both teams, even and the Giants, are not doing very well either at this moment. But anyway, it's early. Today we're going to kind of shuffle through a couple of topics. The first thing we're going to talk about, obviously, are the three musicians we've lost in the past week as of the day we're doing this, which is the 25th. The big one, obviously, is Prince, that shocked the living daylights out of everybody. And there was also guitarist Lonnie Mack, and today, or last night actually, was it today or last night, Billy Paul, who did Me and Mrs. Jones. Let's start with Prince. Let me start the discussion because I was online when the first notes, when people started passing around TMZ links, and I have to admit, I posted something at the time, and I said, if this is a punk, this is the biggest punk of all time, because I was really crossing my fingers hoping that they had been completely fooled, and sadly that's not the case. But I was, it's like Michael Jackson, and of course at this stage where we are now, we don't know the results of the autopsy, although we've been hearing some things about drugs, although I know several stories that I'd heard the day after he died saying he never took anything. So I don't know, but it's really it's just so sad to lose a talent like that. And there's no question, none of us are going to argue that this man was not talented. He was, and I watched that Rock and Roll Hall of Fame video and read the Rolling Stone story, which blew my mind because Olivia almost didn't let him play. That freaked me out. I could not believe that she would actually, because the reason was because he didn't know George, but she was persuaded to let him in, and God, he gave the performance of his life. I mean, that was just astounding. Go ahead.
Did you get the impression that maybe Danny argued on his behalf? Because if you look at the clip, which is out on YouTube, the interaction just in terms of eye contact between Danny and Prince is actually pretty interesting.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think Danny, the Rolling Stone story, did you read that? It didn't say, I don't think that Danny argued it, but it said she was persuaded, and he did have a comment, I guess, after it was over, but you could see him smiling all the way through it. He was just he was extremely happy, and there's I have no doubt that he was one of the reasons that she got persuaded to allow that. But boy, that was amazing, absolutely amazing.
She probably wanted it to be more like the concert for George, where everybody on stage were really friends of George, and that would have meant more to him, and she probably wanted that approach. That's what I'm guessing here. Yeah. And since there's no real connection between Prince and George, with the Beatles for the most part, I can understand her feeling that way. Yeah. It's kind of like what we've talked about before when we've discussed tribute concerts here. There are shows like the concert for George, which is emotionally draining, not just because the performances are so wonderful, but they're all people who meant something to George.
Sure.
Whereas you take something like George Fest, which is great in its own way, which just came out recently, but a lot of those artists are new artists of today that George didn't even know. Mm-hmm. So I can understand Olivia's approach or what she was thinking at the time. But yeah, you watched that performance, and I remember back then when we first saw it, we were all blown away, and everybody was talking about Prince.
Yeah.
But it was nice to have Tom Petty sing the song while my guitar gently weeps, along with Jeff Lynne. And I had forgotten that Steve Winwood was on the performance too, on keyboards too, and Danny.
It's interesting that of the comments that have come from sort of the Beatle camp, the tribute statements to Prince. The one that seems to be the most heartfelt came from Sean Lennon, which makes sense because Sean is part of the the generation that really was turned on by Prince, and plus the fact that apparently they were friends, and at least according to Sean, it was Prince who got him to stop smoking, which is quite a thing when you consider that his father chain smoked right up to the night of his death, and Yoko was also a smoker. I don't know whether she's ever given it up or not, but the fact that Sean was able to give it up at the urging of Prince is really something, and his comments were very, very heartfelt. So it's and Danny's as well.
Yeah, I was that was surprising. Yeah, it was interesting. Anybody else want to say anything there? I mean, that was
as we've been saying throughout this entire year. It's been a brutal year
really
for all the musicians that have died. But in a way, this is similar with David Bowie, where we didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
And I'm really feeling for, everyone who was affected by these musicians of the past year, but in particular Sean, because Sean had a relationship with Bowie too, and loved his music. So, in fact, he was there at the first Bowie tribute in New York City. He performed on stage. So, between Bowie and now Prince, Sean's really got to be feeling it.
Sure.
So,
I was quite surprised because when I looked up, when I went looking up, Twitter comments that night and saw Sean's series, I was like, oh my God, really? That was amazing. Julian's didn't pop up until the next day, I mean, that was just wild. It really was.
But it's nice. It's nice that Paul and Ringo issued statements because Prince is not someone that I associate with Paul or Ringo for the most part, even though I'm sure their paths crossed. Yeah, so I was pleased that they said something. But there is one other connection, which is the fact that Sheila E. was in Ringo's All-Star Band
with
3 tours. And on all 3 tours, there were 2 songs that Sheila performed, The Glamorous Life and also A Love Bizarre, which Prince wrote, both those songs. So Ringo drummed on a couple of Prince compositions there with Sheila E.
Right. Yeah. I didn't even think about Sheila E. So I'm looking up here. I'm sure she. Oh, here's what she said. When death comes too early, chaos reigns in its wake. During times like these, we must rise above the dusk. So, yeah.
And it does seem that the musical luminaries that we've lost in just the span of 4 months are all, for the most part, are ones who really kind of push the envelope. Bowie, Prince, Maurice White of Earth, Wind and Fire, Keith Emerson. Even Glenn Frey, who was a kind of a pioneer of country rock. I mean, the current country music owes a hell of a lot to the Eagles.
Sure do.
Yeah. So they
and I hate to sound morbid, but the year has just begun.
Yeah, I mean it's only exactly. And
most of these people that have died are older. And it's gonna happen, and I don't even want to think about it. And I'm sure a lot of people listening don't want to think about it. But I mean, the time will come, and God help us when it does.
It's especially for performers, they do seem to reach their 60s and 70s, and one thing or another happens.
I didn't think he was that old. When they said 58, I was surprised. I didn't think he was that. He never looked that old.
Right.
He never acted that old. Let's put it that way. So, let's talk a little bit about Lonnie Mack and Billy Paul, both of whom also died, and for for fewer people, obviously they had some influence, and some their music meant something to them. I have somewhere in my collection the vinyl Lonnie Mack album from the 50s that and he was a great guitarist. I think I played his version of Memphis, which he recorded at a session for somebody else, and they released it after, and it's a great cover of the Chuck Berry song.
Sure, it was a hit. It was a hit, really. I think it was during the summer of '63, so it was that that last summer before Beatlemania hit America. And it's interesting that it's a cover of a song that the Beatles themselves covered for the BBC.
Yeah, he was a technician on that V on that V-neck guitar. He loved that.
Yeah. So,
but and then Billy Paul, I have to say everybody's heard Me and Mrs. Jones. I mean, you couldn't help but hear it. It was a big hit. But I didn't know. Ken, you revealed something really interesting there. I was going to say Lonnie Mack covered From Me to You, by the way. And Ken, you revealed something interesting as we were talking before the show. Would you like to tell everyone?
Well, Billy covered Let 'Em In, and it was released as a single. And in fact, it was not long after the Wings single. It was either in '76 or '77 it came out as a single. It was a minor hit here in the States. And I think it was like a top 40 single over in the UK. But it was kind of similar to what Paul had done, only there was some African Americans mentioned in the lyrics. So he took some liberties there. So, yeah, and it kind of reminded me in a way. I'm always a little bit surprised whenever someone covers a Beatles song or a solo song right after the artist already recorded it. And it reminded me of like when Wilson Pickett covered Hey Jude, and it was a single like almost instantly after the Beatles version was.
Yeah.
So but I always liked that version. I used to play Let 'Em In from Billy Paul back in my days on New Jersey radio, and that's one that he covered right there. You can always check it out online.
Okay. That's interesting. I'm sure some people will check it out. Let's go now to our next little topic, which will be Paul's tour, which keeps chugging on and adding new dates. He just added a second date in Cleveland today. I've been watching some of the McCartney mailing lists. I don't know if you guys are on those fan mailing lists, but there is some real concern about his voice and how he's going to hold up on this tour. You guys want to say something about that? What do you think?
Well, as a matter of fact, I just got today the new Beatle Fan Extra. I don't know, Allan, do you still get the fax version?
No, the mailed version just.
Oh, yeah, you get the mail version also. Right. Okay, and I got it today, and in there's a review from Beatle Fan's longtime West Coast correspondent Peter Palmieri of the same show that Steve saw and reviewed last week. And
Peter was there, and I didn't see him. Darn.
Yeah. And what's interesting is he mentioned something that you kind of touched on a little bit last week, and that is, to quote Peter, he says that in his performance, persona, and charm, it makes you overlook the vocal deficiencies, and in that way, he compares it to Elvis in the '70s. And to Sinatra in the 80s and early 90s, when it was very obvious that they were not what they had been physically, or even maybe even mentally.
I don't think I'd go that far, especially.
Well, no, I don't mean that. I mean, just the fact that that people at the concerts, except for because usually when you see the comments about his voice, it usually comes from people that never go to the shows, and the people that actually go to the shows, they don't really seem to be all that concerned about his voice. But obviously it's not. When we'll be talking a little bit more about this in the next segment. But his voice is not what it was. Right. And that's that's all there is to it. And,
I've been wondering. I keep wondering if they will, record this, or if they will put out some kind of a live anthology of some, of the recent tours, kind of like what Ringo did, at one point. It's like I said last week. You're there. It's the. That segment that Paul does where he says "drink it in." I think that the reverse is true.
Yeah,
it's really true.
Yeah, very, very much so.
And it's hard for me to say that without sounding like like I'm falling apart, screaming and stuff. But you have to, you got to give the guy, credit for, what he is, what he does. He doesn't, make people run away from this the stage because they hate, they don't want to see what he's doing, or he's very enjoyable. He has charm. That's one damn thing he's always had, that we can't.
Sure.
Another thing I think from the reports that we're seeing, obviously I haven't seen him this tour, but we're talking about an occasional minute or note here and there, and the same thing with Saturday Night Live when he did Maybe I'm Amazed. That was unfortunate that it was the only song he did, and so that sort of makes it loom larger. But if the guy can play like a 2.5 hour set and you only have a couple of things to complain about at his age, it could be worse.
And I think I was kind of saying that last week too. The guy's in his 70s. Jesus, if I was to sit here and sing right now, you guys would probably all be covering your ears. You don't want
very likely.
Very likely. You don't want me to do that. But this is but this is a guy that we know has a great voice. One of the best rock and roll voices, and I'm not trying to be overly I sound like a huge fan, or whatever. But we know he has a great voice. He's got one of the best rock and roll voices. I'm not the only one that's ever said that. So when guys get older, they Sinatra wasn't perfect at the end. I've heard Tom Jones actually sounds a little rusty when I've heard him recently.
Absolutely.
So it happens. It happens. But like you say, Allan. If that's all you have to deal with in a 3-hour show, that's fine. It really is.
I'm going to hold off making any kind of criticism about Paul's voice until I see his show. But for the most part, I just wish that there are certain songs like Maybe I'm Amazed that really and truly he can't cut it anymore. That one is a very difficult song to sing, and I wish that he would take it out of his set list, albeit it is a classic. Everybody wants to hear him do it. But, for the most part, when I've seen him do a 2.5+ hour show, yeah, he's had a few moments there when he's missed a note. And I also don't necessarily buy this thing that as you get older, that you can't expect to be the exact same way. Yeah, that's true. But there are people who really work their voice and know exactly what to do and what they're capable of doing. I
Tony
mean, you
Bennett.
take a look at Tony Bennett. Perfect. Right there, Al. Thank you. I mean, the guy is, 90 years old? And
nearly.
All right, close to 90.
I think he's 86 or 87 now.
Really? All right.
Yeah.
Forgive me. He's 80. But still,
Yeah,
he's
so it's
amazing.
close.
He's amazing for
Yeah.
his age. I've seen people like Little Anthony, who's got to be, I don't know, upper 60s or at this point or something like that. Is he?
No, he's well in his 70s.
Okay. Thank you for correcting me several times, Al. I don't mind. But he's amazing. I mean, they know how to work their voice. They know what they're capable of. They don't overdo. There's something to be said about that. I don't know if Paul actually does vocal exercises. I know he sure does the sound checks before his shows. And that's a good thing because it warms him up and gets him ready. But, it wouldn't be a crime if he cuts back on his shows and does a 2-hour show. Or even, God forbid, an hour and a half to 2 hours. Most performers that I've seen do a show that's 2 hours or less. Paul gives you a lot more for the money. So it's very hard to be super critical of someone like that. And for the most part, he does pace himself in a way where he does songs that might be vocally demanding first, and the next song is not as demanding. He knows what to do in that regard. So, but still, for someone who's 73.
Right. So about to be 74.
No, about to be 74. What he pulls off is pretty amazing.
Yeah,
but,
can I just make an observation? I mean, not to take anything at all away from Tony Bennett, who is incredible, but the kind of singing Tony Bennett does and the kind of atmosphere Tony Bennett sings in is different. I mean, Paul is on stage in a loudly amplified rock show and singing things like, Helter Skelter and, really sort of very shouty things. And those songs and that condition of, having to sing in that much noise, it really does take a toll on your voice that singing in a somewhat more restrained setting, which Tony Bennett does, doesn't do. So, that, and in a way, maybe that's why he sort of settled back into some other kinds of projects now and then, where he's in an acoustic setting and, not out there having to shout over the sound of a rock band. I mean, it's quite loud. You've been in a band, you've played on stage, that like to overcome that, you end up pushing your voice a little more than maybe natural to do. And even though he knows how to do it as well as anybody, it still does take a toll, I think. And so I'm not sure that comparing him to Tony Bennett is, it's true that Tony Bennett has, gone on for quite a while in great voice. But, and again, it's not like Paul's voice is shot. It's you can't make it here and there.
Well, I mean,
So,
none of you guys mentioned Ringo. I mean, look at Ringo's a great example. I mean, Ringo's older than Paul, and his voice sounds great. Granted, the shows aren't as long as Paul's are, but he's still
and he takes
not
long
on
rests in between.
Yes, exactly, and he doesn't do as many songs.
Right.
And his songs aren't vocally demanding the way Paul's are.
Right.
And he also brings his songs down lower in key.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
And Paul rarely has done that.
Right.
So, you make a very good point, Allan. But then there's something to be said about songs, the way that Tony Bennett sings his songs, which require, a very good vocal range there to be able to hit high notes and to stay on the notes. I mean, there's someone like Colin Blunstone. Colin Blunstone is an amazing singer who's now in his early 70s. Whenever I've seen the Zombies in concert, his voice is absolutely amazing. And he stays on high notes. He has control. You don't really hear Paul sing high notes and stay on them for long. So, of course, Colin Blunstone is not singing Helter Skelter, like you said.
Yeah.
But, there's different types of vocals, but I think for the most part, we should be really happy that Paul is able to do what he does. And I think if it wasn't for the fact that he's one of the greatest singers of all time, and we've come to expect the greatest vocals from him anyway. I mean, when I listen back to, or I watch Rock Show, I mean, my God, was he on top of his game right there? Those are the vocals that we love to hear. So, but that was 40 years ago.
Yes, I was just about to say, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
well, anyway, okay. Well, then that brings us to our next little topic. And when Diana Krall showed up in Vancouver to sing My Valentine, or to play My Valentine with Paul, it made me. I went back to to look at Kisses on the Bottom, and I put the album on. And I thought, this is interesting because I have to be honest, I haven't really listened to it much since I stopped listening to it right after it came out. And I was wondering how you guys felt about the album. And I'm going to start. Let me start. Well, Ken, I'm going to start with you. How do you feel about Kisses on the Bottom now as opposed to when it came out?
I love the album a lot. I love most of all the production behind it, the arrangements of the songs. I love the fact that he's doing something like this. The only problem, I have a couple of problems with the album, which is I wish that Paul didn't do so many songs in his softer voice. I do like the softer approach, what he calls his littler voice, but I think there are too many times when he used it. And there's nothing wrong with certain songs to do that on. In fact, he's done that and other times in his solo career. And even in the Beatles, I think when he sang I Will, for example, that's a very softer delivery in his vocals. So when I hear him do that kind of thing on Kisses on the Bottom, it takes me to a song like that. But at the same time, I wish that, because I still think that many of these songs he can do in his ordinary range, his vocal range, I wish he would have sang more songs that way. And in particular, if you listen to songs like Accentuate the Positive, where he's using his normal voice, or My Valentine, or Only Our Hearts, which to me is like the gem on this album. There are the two, nobody ever talks about that song. Everybody talks about My Valentine. But Only Our Hearts is a great ballad, and Paul is singing that in his regular range. And I'd like to have heard more songs sung in that range. And I wish that there were a few more up-tempo songs, because the album does drag a bit because it's very ballady. But the arrangements of the songs are wonderful. And I found it really interesting, in particular, a song like Bye Bye Blackbird, which you're so used to hearing up-tempo. And Paul's doing this real slow version, and it works that way. It's nice. On my radio show, I played Ringo's version and Paul's version back to back, and they're so completely different. And I like the album for a lot of reasons, but mainly because the arrangements are wonderful. The songs that were chosen were interesting. They weren't just the songs that everybody knows. There were some of those and some more obscure tunes in there. And I love the fact that Paul embraced this stuff, because he always did like that kind of music in the first place. And he really should have done this a long time ago. We've talked about how Ringo did this on Sentimental Journey in 1970. And, he was way ahead of his time, not trying to be. But so many other artists went on to do that format, like Linda Ronstadt and Harry Nilsson and certainly Rod Stewart, and they were so much more successful at it. I love the fact that he did this. I'd like to see him do more of it again. But like I said, I wish that he would sing more in his natural voice, because I still think that for these particular songs and others that he could choose, he could cut it. He could sing those songs in that kind of range.
Yeah.
All you got to do is hear those songs. Only Our Hearts. Listen to Only Our Hearts, folks. That is a great song with Stevie Wonder doing a really nice harmonica solo in there. If most of the songs were his natural voice and there were a few more up-tempo tunes, I would have liked the album more. But overall, it was, it's an impeccable performance in terms of arrangements and production.
Al?
Well, I went in with a built-in bias toward this kind of material, because this is the music that I kind of grew up with before I really started listening to rock and roll. It was the, as they call it, the Great American Songbook. And, that was, in where I lived, we had the old WNEW in New York on as the constant radio station. Plus, also, these are the kind of songs. Most of them are the kind of songs that you heard all the time on the variety shows of the TV variety shows of the 50s and early 60s. So I've always loved this material, and I had always kind of wished that Paul had done an album like this, and frankly, he probably should have done it about maybe 10 years earlier, because Ken mentioned the songs in which he uses his little voice, and it's true that on those songs, that's where the kind of ragged edges of his voice now is most evident. I noticed that listening to it just this afternoon, as a matter of fact. I like the fact that he used a small group. That it wasn't. I had a feeling that if this album had been produced by George Martin, he might have surrounded Paul with more of an orchestral landscape, musical landscape, much in the way that Nelson Riddle did with Linda Ronstadt, Gordon Jenkins did with Harry Nilsson, and Rod Stewart had on all of those standard albums that he did. So I was glad that Paul used a small group headed up, as Steve mentioned, by Diana Krall. And the material, as Ken said, a lot of these are songs that not everybody's going to know. I mean, the Inchworm. The only people that would know the Inchworm are people that saw the movie Hans Christian Andersen. For the most part.
Actually, Al, I remember, and I don't know if you guys do. Annette did the song way back when.
Really?
Yeah, I remember a record with Annette.
Wow.
Someone else that we know affiliated with Paul also did the song. Mary Hopkin.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, that's true.
Who are you thinking of?
Mary Hopkin.
Oh, that's right. There we go.
On Postcard.
That's right.
Which Paul produced.
Yeah, that's right. So it's a nice mixture of the standards like Always and It's Only a Paper Moon and The Glory of Love and Accentuate the Positive, and things that are less known, plus the two originals, my Valentine and Only Our Hearts, which, as Ken said, is just a wonderful, wonderful song. So it's an album that I've always really enjoyed, just with the caveat that maybe he should have done it 10 years earlier, when as Ken said, the quiet voice didn't have quite the raggedy edges that it does now.
Can you pinpoint those raggedy edges, like a few songs where you heard it?
Yeah, specifically, I'm looking at the Home, When Shadows Fall. Definitely. More I Cannot Wish You. Although, as Paul has said, that's a song that is very emotional for him.
Right.
So it's possible that the kind of vulnerable vocal quality comes from his emotions rather than any vocal raggediness. But that's probably, and even Accentuate the Positive. There's a little bit of raggediness but just on the edges. Again, it's nothing major. But I just when I first listened to it, when it first came out, and then particularly today when I was listening to it, I thought, if he had done this maybe 10 years before, this would have been a super album. But that said, it's still a very good one.
But if you like his natural voice, like on My Valentine and Only Our Hearts, don't you think he could have done all the songs on this album that way?
Yeah. I think that's probably yeah. I can't argue with that, but
yeah.
It's possible that he was, again, using the small group setting. Maybe he felt that the small voice, as you call it, was more appropriate.
Yeah, I think that's a good very good statement, Al. Allan?
Yeah, I think I'm going to surprise you guys, actually.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. When this came out, I really strongly disliked it. And the distance from there to loving it is a little bit too long for me to have traversed in the past few days. I listened to the album again the other day for the first time since it came out, really, and listened to it when it came out and had no reason to go back. But listening to it again, I've got to say, I really kind of liked it. Not loved it, but I could see what he was doing. I mean, I think that, and I think we may all agree on this, that the small voice was a very deliberate choice, and probably, yes, because of the small ensemble. The small ensemble was a deliberate choice. I think if he had done it with George Martin, he probably, I don't think it would have been just a question of, going into a room and it's what George Martin wants to give you. I think he discusses what he wants, and George Martin could well have done an album like this. I mean, the band is really, really good. I really liked listening to them. Very tight, good arrangements in really most cases, and a really good sound. Diana Krall's piano. I mean, who can argue with that? And there were others that stood out too. I mean, the bass playing, Robert Hurst on at least a lot of them. I don't know if all of them. John Pizzarelli guitar. A lot of really good people in this group. And I kind of, I first, when I listened to it again, the vocal style bothered me a little, but, as I settled into it, I began to think, okay, he's doing it as if he's in, the Hotel Carlisle and he's taking over the Bobby Short style,
right.
And it just seemed to make sense to me, and I kind of enjoyed it. I haven't, generally speaking, enjoyed rock singers doing this stuff, with one early exception, which was Linda Ronstadt. And that was then. This was not a repertory I really knew very much at the time. I mean, everybody knows some of these songs, but it just wasn't something I listened to particularly. And I got her albums with Nelson Riddle, and I thought, wow, some of these are great songs. Bewitched, Bothered, and Bewildered. And, and I said this to a jazz critic friend of mine who said, Allan, for God's sakes, get some Ella Fitzgerald records. And I got some Ella Fitzgerald records and never listened to the Linda Ronstadt records again. And then, sort of devoured Ella Fitzgerald records and Sinatra records and Tony Bennett records. And, I just sort of, how you sometimes, like, discover something, for yourself, not like you're discovering it, but, discover it for yourself. And then you just sort of say, okay, what have I been missing? And you throw yourself into it and you listen to 10,000 albums of, whatever it is. I did that. And so, Rod Stewart doing it, didn't do it for me. Even Harry Nilsson, not much.
Really, I thought Harry was good. Actually,
it was okay, but and I guess that was the way I felt about Paul's album as well when it came out. Plus, the fact that what I want from Paul is new songs of his own. Whether I'm going to like them or not, or like most of them or not. I mean, I think of him as a songwriter, and so I didn't really want to hear him doing these things, or I think of him as a rock songwriter. So if Run Devil Run comes out, at least I feel it's in his his area. But what Ken says is true. This was the music Paul grew up hearing, and it's something maybe he should have done a long time ago. But I don't know about that. Now that I sort of feel like I understand what he's doing with that voice in these songs, possibly 10 years ago, he might have just sung them straightforward in his full voice, and I think that these performances have a kind of character that I found kind of interesting. I mixed feelings about it, because I know what his voice can be, and these sounded in a way a little weak to me, but I felt deliberately weak. I just felt that this was a choice. This is what he's doing for a reason, because he feels that this is a voice that can do these sons. You hear jazz singers taking that kind of approach, sometimes. So yeah, in a way, having rethought the whole thing while listening to both the album and the live version, and I think in some cases I like the live versions better. I just came out on a completely different side than I went in on. And I also like the extra things on the extended version. Like, I think Baby's Request totally belongs here. This is it's a perfect song for this kind of thing, and it shows that he can write in that style, which I guess we knew. But hearing Baby's Request in its original format, even though it's the same song, I didn't necessarily think that the implications that this could be this kind of a jazz setting, and it's perfect for it. So I enjoyed it, actually. Not quite love it yet, but maybe if I hear it another couple of times, I'll get to where Ken is. But who knows?
Again, I never said that it was a perfect album. But, I said what I liked about it and the few things that bothered me about it.
Right.
It seemed to me that he was trying to play kind of like a Bing Crosby crooner. Mm-hmm. You kind of get the picture of him next to one of those big microphones, with a small group behind him, and that's what he was really trying to do here. And I kept really hoping, and I think because I had hoped he'd do something like this. I remember writing something about this a few years ago before this came out, and I believe at the time he actually made some kind of a response at some point that but this is something I'd always wished he'd do, and I always thought he would do it in kind of a Till There Was You voice, and I think that's what we're all looking for. We were all looking for, and I think that when that didn't happen, I think we were all kind of a little disappointed. I think the surprise just didn't. The crooner voice trying to be Bing Crosby just didn't seem. It was so out of character for him. And I really wish, if he was going to do that, I wouldn't have minded if he had done it on maybe one or two songs, but to do it for the whole album, it just didn't. It really didn't work as far as I was concerned. There are some songs I really like. I love I'm Going to Sit Right Down and Write Myself a Letter because it's a great song. And he actually adapts that voice, the little voice, to that really well. Paper Moon is another song that I really, really like anyway. Mm-hmm. And so I can handle that. Accentuate the Positive just sounds a little too croonish, and that's just My Valentine is great. I'm not going to argue on that one, but there are so many. It just seems like he was trying to play a role that he really shouldn't have played. That if he had been a little more natural, this would have worked out a lot better. I love the band. Diana Krall is. Let me say, I think I have all her albums. I love Diana Krall a lot. I love her music. I also like the fact that Paul did the Christmas song. I thought that was really nice. But I think as a whole, my feeling about this has not changed that much. Although I will say, after what Allan said, I'm going to go back and listen to it and give it another pass and see how I feel about it. But it just, the crooning thing just is what overshadows this for me. So
well, you could say that, on My Valentine and Only Our Hearts and a couple of the others, he was using at least the 21st century version of his Till There Was You voice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I suppose.
So, but yeah, there are several songs where there may be some overuse of the quote small voice.
Yeah,
okay.
It's kind of interesting how Allan thought that kind of voice gave the album some character or Orting's character. Two different points of view right there.
Yeah.
But
right.
Another song on the album that I really like is Get Yourself Another Fool. And there you have a perfect example of Paul and his natural voice. And he sounds natural singing that. But, Paul, throughout his whole career with the Beatles on up, he's always written dance hall songs, When I'm 64, Honey Pie, those songs. Baby's Request is in that same vein. You Gave Me the Answer, those songs.
Sure.
So to me, for him to do songs that are meant to croon seems pretty natural to me, even though sometimes he's actually made fun of that. He has parodied like Frank Sinatra every now and then. So Honey Pie is just like that. So to me, it's just one of the many styles of music that Paul has explored and has done so well. So the question is, do you like this other voice of Paul's?
And a good comparison, and it's, although they're different styles, is the Russian album, where he does the Duke Ellington song that he just really turned on its ear. I mean, that was such a it was such a great version of Don't Get Around Much Anymore, and I mean, he really didn't, the way I thought, do the same kind of, there wasn't the same kind of transformation here, although I acknowledge that we're talking about two different genres, but still, that arrangement on Don't Get Around Much Anymore was really a genius arrangement as far as I was concerned. I really wish there had been the same kind of that with Kisses on the Bottom, and it's hard for me to go there. It really is. But in any event,
you're talking about a rockin' version, which he wasn't gonna rock on Kisses on the Bottom.
No, I agree. I know that. I said that. I said we're talking about two different genres, but at the same time, there are things you can do with songs in their element, and I don't feel he did the same thing here. So that's my thinking. I also think Tommy LaPuma has to share some of the I don't know if you want to call it blame, but I mean, because he was the producer on this thing. So in any event,
I wouldn't blame him.
No,
I'm very happy that it came out, and in fact, there was an interview that came out where Paul and Tommy are together, and Paul's kind of hinting there may be another one.
Well,
of course, that's several years ago now, but
right. And but the album was a big success. I mean, it won a Grammy. So if you can ever take time off at touring, damn it, what can I say?
You know how many people around the world would crucify you for saying that? That want to see him.
Wait a minute. Except the people in Australia, who are really getting upset now because he is not going there, and I can't blame him, and I don't. And I keep occasionally get asked questions. Why isn't he coming to Australia? I have no idea. The only thing that I really can think of is the jet lag. I mean, maybe he doesn't want to go through that anymore. Although he goes back and forth between England and the U.S. God, and he's going to be in Europe.
Japan has a long trip.
Yeah,
too, so.
That's true.
That's true too. I have no idea why he doesn't want to go back to Australia, and it's. I'm crossing my fingers for you guys. Those of you that listen to us down there, I'm crossing my fingers. I hope he decides to do it. I really do. Anyway, do we still have some time?
Well, actually, I wanted to ask Allan one question. I was curious because I mentioned the fact that I went into Kisses on the Bottom, from a start with a positive bias for the music, because that's those are the songs that I grew up listening to. Mm-hmm. So I gather that that kind of material really wasn't played in the Kozin household.
Not particularly.
When you were a kid?
I don't think so. I mean, if my parents listened to stuff, I generally wasn't there listening to it with them because I had my own thing. I mean, and I pretty early had a turntable and a stereo set up in my room, which is where I would go. So if they were playing any of that, I would have just probably had an attitude about it,
I had to put it up with Lester Lannon and Lawrence Welk, so there. And for those, and there are people who will go, probably heard of Lawrence Welk, but probably don't know who the heck Lester Lannon is.
Lester Lannon, that would be tough.
Because that would Mitch.
You may have to Google that one. It's Lanin for those of you who want to Google Lester Lannon. But boy, oh God.
And also, just like you, Al, and you, Steve, I was exposed to all this music when I was a little kid. I was exposed to everything, and it wasn't like it was force-fed to me. I heard Frank Sinatra music growing up since the womb. And Tony Bennett and Rat Pack music and, all the great crooners and Bing Crosby and soundtrack music. And so this stuff is all natural to me. And just like you, Al, I listened to the same radio station in New York City on the AM dial, which was WNEW. And so I heard that all the time in the car. It was just natural for me to hear this kind of stuff. So for Paul to do this, and first of all, it's not even a stretch for Paul to do this. Just to do a whole album of it was the difference, and the fact that it's songs that were, for the most part, covered, except the two originals. So it was very natural for me to adapt to this. Didn't take any effort.
Nope, not at all.
And you know what's funny? It's funny how, as you get older, you come back to that music, even if you didn't listen to it when you were a kid, which I did not. You end up finding yourself coming back to it, as I have. I'm a big Sinatra fan, a big Tony Bennett fan, and I've actually gotten into a lot of soundtracks over the past couple of years, and that's not something that I spent a lot of time listening to when I was in my teens, believe me. So there we go. We've got a couple of minutes left, and I'm going to do a Stump the Band question for everybody, and here it is. We've been talking ever since George Martin's passing. Everybody's talked about how George Martin was the fifth Beatle. But here's my question: if the Beatles had expanded, and this is after '64, if the Beatles had expanded to a fifth member, who would you have added? Who would you have added?
Jeez. It's not something I've thought about.
They actually did consider adding Billy Preston, but that's them.
Right.
You were asking us.
Okay. Okay. Who would you have added? Let's keep it to say early 60s rather than late, because it's too easy to say Billy Preston. Nobody. Did I stump you? Did I stump the band? Oh my God.
It was kind of the perfect circle,
Yeah, exactly. I would say nobody, because I think, especially once Ringo joined, that was the final piece of the puzzle. And so that made them the perfect unit. And I think having a fifth member would have, it would have made it less perfect.
Well, remember, number one, we're talking an imaginary situation.
But still.
Number two, okay, all right.
Yeah, it was. Right. I would say, for me, nobody.
Because I actually have an answer, but go ahead.
Okay.
Anybody else?
It has to be one of their contemporaries or from different...
Yeah, I would think it would have to be, if we're talking 60s, yeah, it would have to be a contemporary.
Okay, so the sort of, perverse imp that drives my answers much of the time kind of wants to say Keith Richards.
Okay.
Why is that?
Give them a little, pull them back towards the more bluesy influences, and he and John could have had a great time trading Chuck Berry licks, and I think they obviously ultimately went in very different directions and had different interests, but I think there was enough commonality in there that could have been interesting.
Okay. Ken?
Well, kind of like what Al said, I can't really see them having a fifth member, but if I had to pick one, maybe Eric Clapton. Only because Eric got along so well with George. They're, the two of them together on guitar, two very different styles in a lot of ways. Eric would have brought a lot more blues into the band, I think. And also, John loved working with Eric Clapton too. They all admired Eric. So I think he certainly would have gave the band even more of a presence, if that's even possible. But then also keep in mind that the Beatles weren't just about the music. The Beatles are also about the personalities too. So if you're thinking about their movies, could you see someone like Keith Richards or Eric Clapton being a fifth member and bouncing off the others personality-wise too? You got to think about that too. It's not just about the music that they did. Right. But if I thought strictly music, maybe Eric Clapton or Nicky Hopkins, who was he fits so well in with everyone that he's ever worked with, doing the keyboard work that he did, which was evident on Revolution. But, his work with the Stones and the Kinks and a lot of people like that, maybe someone like that. But again, like I said, you got to think about the personalities too.
Yeah. Okay. And especially since Steve, you said you were kind of restricting it to the early years, there's no way that Eric Clapton would have joined a group like the Beatles because, he left the Yardbirds because of the fact that they had hits or at least one hit. Right.
That's a great point.
And we're going to pop. So, and as far as Keith, what were they going to do? Steal him from the Stones?
Well, this is, like I said, this is an imaginary situation. So, anything is open. My answer, believe it or not, is not an instrumentalist. It's a songwriter, and I would have said Ray Davies.
Okay.
Because of Davies' imagination as a songwriter, and again, we're talking an imaginary situation here, and everybody's going, "No, he would never have left the Kinks," and I know that. But I'm just saying, if you concoct the situation and you say, and you also know that although we don't know for sure, how much power the Beatles had back then. It's very possible that they could have said, "Come aboard," and the person would have come aboard. It's like a baseball trade or something.
But when you say not an instrumentalist, of course he was, and a singer. And so were you envisioning him just joining as a composer and not playing and being backstage?
I'm envisioning his composing, as having a lot of reason that he'd come aboard.
Then you could get Brian Wilson,
Yeah.
That's true.
Why don't you get every great songwriter in one band together?
All right, gentlemen.
And Brian would have been actually probably a better mix personally, because I don't know, I have a feeling that having Ray Davies in the same band with John Lennon and Paul McCartney would have been a little bit of there would have been some egos bruised there.
Sure. I am very sure there would have.
Yeah.
I'm very sure. Anyway, we have run out of time, and I gotta hold things down before everybody goes crazy.
Okay.
I want to thank you all for listening. You can contact us by writing thingswesaidtodayradioshow at gmail.com, or we are on Twitter at thingswesaidfab. We have a couple of pages actually on Facebook, but we have a group page on Facebook that you're welcome to join. There's also a radio page for the Fab 4 radio broadcast. And thank you, Matt, and thank you, Allan, on Pure Pop Radio for putting us out there. And thank you, Michael Lynch, for writing the theme song. And thank you, Allan. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Al. Thank you, me. Oh, I'm just talking away. Anybody have anything to say before we?
Well, yes. As a matter of fact, and Allan mentioned this afternoon. I have in my hands a copy of the brand new issue, if you can see it here, a copy of the brand
yeah, I can see it.
Yeah, the brand new issue of Beatle Fan Magazine, and with a picture of Sir George Martin on the cover, and the lead-off article in a section devoted to Sir George is a magnificent piece by our very own Mr. Cozen, and it's followed by a okay piece, I'd say.
No, it's a really good piece, Al.
Thank you, sir. Kind of a baker's dozen of what I consider representative works of Sir George over the years, not just with the Beatles, but throughout his career. So,
right.
So we want to get a plug in for that.
All righty. Anybody else got anything to say before we call this an evening?
You can always check out my website, kenmichaelsradio.com, for weekly Beatles trivia. And in fact, I have the brand new DVD of the first movie that Ringo starred in on his own, Candy, which is coming out next month, as a matter of fact. So you can win that on my website.
You mean a Blu-ray?
It's actually, oh yeah, that's right. It is the Blu-ray. It's available as both DVD and Blu-ray.
Okay, because it's been out before. It's been out for several years.
In Candy's case, it would be more like a midnight Blu-ray, right?
Yeah. Yes,
ooh.
indeed.
But that's at kenmichaelsradio.com. And you can always email me, Ken Michaels, at everylittlething@att.net.
Okay.
That's it.
Any other contact for you guys? You got Allan, you want to throw in some contact info?
Oh, Facebook, just under Allan Cozen or Allan Cozen Remixed. But we also, I read the things that come into the show email account. We got some really interesting stuff this week, so keep them coming.
Yes, thank you for that. There was one suggestion. I won't talk about it right now, but we are considering it, and the person who wrote it will probably know what we're referring to. Mr. Sussman, do you got something you want to?
Other than the brand new issue of Beatle Fan Magazine, which you can get www.beatlefan.com, because all the stores that used to carry it are no longer in business. For the most part. Otherwise, you can contact me on Facebook at Al Sussman or on Twitter at ASUSS49.
And you can reach me at BeatlesExaminer@gmail.com. I'm also on Facebook in a couple of places. I have my own page, and I have a Beatles news group called Beatles News and Commentary. So this is Steve Marinucci saying thank you very much for listening, and see you next time.